This is your Thursday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. It's Wild Preview Day. I'm excited about that. I hope you guys are excited as well. The Wild open their regular season Thursday night against the Rangers. A lot of optimism for this season. A lot of questions, though, after the offseason departure of Kevin Fiala. A lot of different looks in goal for them this year. Maybe some questions about the defense. So a lot to sort out as the year goes along. And Sarah McLellan from the Star Tribune will help me do just that. Help me preview the Wild. That'll be coming up in just a couple of minutes here. I will also get to a listener question about the Timberwolves. It seems quite optimistic, but you know what? They are 4-0 in the preseason, so why not think big about that team? And both of those winter teams should be pretty good this year and maybe even better than pretty good. First, though, what did I miss? Just kind of connecting the dots on some thoughts I was having the other day, listening to Kirk Cousins Wednesday out at the Vikings facility in Eagan talking about roughing the passer calls and, what he thinks has been most impactful over the years in terms of protecting the quarterback. Let's take a journey back to October 15th, 2017. So almost the 5-year anniversary of that date. That was the day the Vikings played the Packers at US Bank Stadium. Vikings came into that game 3-2. Green Bay, I believe, was 4-1 at the time. Early in the game, Anthony Barr hits Aaron Rodgers, lands on him, and ends up ending Aaron Rodgers' season with the hit he put on him. And that changed the whole course of that season and really changed the trajectory of the Vikings and not so much the Packers, but certainly the Vikings. Vikings go on to finish 13-3 that season. Packers without Aaron Rodgers for much of the rest of that season, finished 7-9. Don't really have, the wherewithal to get back in the race. They had a couple late wins that season to try to salvage the year, but 7-9 after that 4-1 start. So that certainly influenced that year. But think about what happened after that. First of all, Vikings decide that even though Case Keenum had a very good season that year, that he was not the long-term answer. They made it to the NFC title game, got blown out by the Eagles, but they were just that one step away from the Super Bowl. They're like, we are one missing piece. We are one dependable quarterback away from getting ultimately to the Super Bowl. And they decide that person is Kirk Cousins. They bring Cousins in on that 3-year, $84 million contract in the offseason, sign him to that mega deal. And that changes the course of things, right? Because then they go from a team that isn't spending a lot on the quarterback to a team that is spending a lot on the quarterback. They go kind of into all-in mode to a certain degree, start losing their ability to maybe pay some of those second and third contracts for those defensive players, or if they do, it becomes expensive. So they sign Kirk Cousins in that moment. The other thing that happens as an offshoot from that game, that play, is the NFL changes its rules on what is acceptable for hitting a quarterback. You call it the Aaron Rodgers rule, you call it the Anthony Barr rule, but they make a new rule before the 2018 season that says you basically can't put your weight on a quarterback when sacking the quarterback or bringing the quarterback to the ground, and we've seen that play out over and over again since then. But basically, it was in response to Barr landing on Rodgers in that game in 2017. So that changed at that moment. Now, what does that have to do exactly with the long-term future of both teams? Well, Kirk Cousins, known for his durability with Washington, in addition to his ability, both of those things going hand in hand. Cousins, interestingly enough, talked a lot about that play, that moment, and at least that rule on Wednesday when asked specifically about what has had the most impact on protecting the quarterback over the years.
Yeah, I don't know exactly where the rules were when I started my career. I know the big one is when they land on you. When a 320-pound man lands on you and you're falling from several feet in the air and he's on you, it's going to be tough to stay healthy in those moments. So the fact that they're saying, hey, you have to, when you hit him, you have to sort of roll off, I think that is one that strategically will prolong quarterback seasons and quarterbacks' careers because it's inevitable that you're going to get drilled in the chest as you throw it. And if they then can land on you and they're big guy, it's not sustainable. That's the one that I think was a win for the quarterbacks.
So if not for that play, do the Vikings really go 13-3 that year? Not a chance, I don't think. I mean, a lot of things fell into place for them that year, but maybe they lose that game, they fall to 3-3. Maybe they're not even a playoff team that year. That opened the door for the whole season. I think they're better than that, but maybe they lose in the first round of the playoffs and they're not convinced that they're one quarterback away. Do they go get Kirk Cousins at that point, or do they stay with Case Keenum? Do they stay with Teddy Bridgewater? That's a big what if. And the flip side of it is, if that rule isn't enacted, is Kirk Cousins as durable in his 4 years with the Vikings so far, 4+ now, as he eventually turned out to be? He'd been a durable quarterback throughout his career up until that point, but what if he comes here and he gets landed on in that way, gets hurt, changes the trajectory of his career, changes the trajectory of how he is thought of? Is he still the quarterback here right now if he had more of a history of getting hurt? He's only missed 2 games in 4 seasons with the Vikings. One of them he sat out while they had nothing to play for, and of course one of them when he had COVID. But he has not been injured in his time here, and that has stayed that way. That has been one of his greatest traits. So just thinking about putting all those pieces together and how that led to not only Kirk Cousins being here, but perhaps Kirk Cousins staying here for better or for worse. I'd say the Vikings will say it is for better right now, as they are 4-1. And this season, like I talked about and like we all talked about with Andrew Kramer and Ben Gessling on Wednesday's Access Vikings podcast, this season feeling a lot to me like 2017, where a lot of things are going right. Do I think they're going to win 13 games? Probably not. But this does have the feel of a season where things have gone unexpectedly well for them, and maybe that's going to keep going. A key facet of that, of course, getting to face the third-string quarterback now for the Dolphins on Sunday, a chance to go 5-1 into the bye without perhaps playing their best football. So think about how all those things are connected. Think about that 5-year anniversary Saturday, and think about where that leaves the Vikings right now.
Take a playcation to Mystic Lake. With 24/7 gaming, the good times never have to end. And you can satisfy your cravings at our restaurants and bars. Or relax in one of our luxurious hotel rooms. Those that play together, stay together. And don't forget to join Club M so you can spark new memories and bask in the rewards along the way. Follow the lights to Mystic Lake, where every day is play day.
Let's talk hockey. It's we haven't talked enough hockey probably in the lead up here in October to the Wild season, but we're going to change that right now. Let's welcome in Sarah McLellan from the Star Tribune, of course, covers the Wild beat for our paper, does a great job doing it, and has an interesting team to cover again this year. Sarah, after they set a team record with 113 points last season, made it to the playoffs, some disappointment once they got there. That series against the Blues kind of got away from them to a certain degree at a certain point, but still plenty of reasons for them to be optimistic going into this year. I guess when a team does that well, you don't expect a ton of changes, but as you think about kind of the off season, what are the bigger kind of, I guess, storylines or things that you feel like they changed coming into the year that people should pay attention to right off the bat?
You're right. Not a ton of roster turnover in the offseason, but the changes that did happen were clearly significant, led by the departure of Kevin Fiala, who was traded to Los Angeles. It was a situation, obviously, where the Wild was feeling a salary cap crunch, especially with the escalating costs of the Zach Parise and Ryan Suter buyouts. So there really wasn't any room in the budget to offer Kevin Fiala a new contract. So he's traded. And obviously the timing of that comes after he just had his best season in the NHL, culminating in 85 points, and he was a 30-goal scorer. So that's a huge chunk of the offense that is now out the door. And obviously it leaves in its wake the question of who picks up that production. And looking at the lineup, it'll probably likely have to be a by committee approach, because obviously still considering their books, there wasn't, some lavish acquisition in response to Fiala's departure. The money just wasn't there. So that was a big, obviously, exit for this team. And the other one came in net with the Wild trading Cam Talbot after re-signing Marc-Andre Fleury. So even though Fleury was familiar with the team, he came in at the deadline. in a trade from Chicago last season. He's the starter, obviously undisputed from the get-go, and he's partnering with a new backup in Philippe Gustafson, who was acquired in that Talbot trade. So a little different look in net from the start of the season, and obviously maybe a question mark on the offense just because of Fiala's departure and how else the team can find a way to produce without someone, obviously, who last season was this team's second best scorer.
Yeah, I'd imagine that, will change. I want to get back to the goaltending in a minute, but I imagine the departure of Fiala does maybe change the identity of a team a little bit. A team that scored so many goals last season was, winning games 6-4, 6-5, 5-4 sometimes, and just, outscoring teams, and was able to do that with that kind of firepower. This year might be a little bit different. Like you're saying, not only a committee approach to replacing Fiala, but, like you wrote about for Thursday's paper, like there were a lot of players on last year's team who had, what do we call them, career years or exceeded expectations with, goals, points, things like that. It is fair to wonder whether, those 8 can sustain that, whether they can exceed that, if some of them will fall back, whether other people like a Marco Rossi will come in and then exceed that, and it all kind of comes out in the wash. But how do you see kind of those players who maybe gave them more than you thought last year? How do you see them performing this year?
Well, I don't think their roles will change much. So if that was the opportunity that they were given last season to take on more responsibility and that's how they responded, that's probably got to be encouraging for the Wild. Someone like a Frederick Gaudreau, who went, from being maybe a minor player on previous teams to getting an opportunity to, down the stretch in the second half, was centering the Kevin Fiala, Matt Boldy line that was completely dynamic for the Wild. So he's still obviously going to have a role that is key in this offense, even though it's obviously a different line with Fiala's exit. The Joel Eriksson-Ek, Marcus Foligno, and Jordan Greenway line, when reunited, obviously when Greenway is healthy and ready to go, their role isn't going to change. They're still going to be billed as this matchup shutdown line, but obviously they've proven they have a knack for scoring as well. And I think too, the role and opportunity that these players will get on special teams, like the power play, that's an opportunity too, that was maybe new for some players and they took advantage. I think otherwise, obviously, this is an offense headlined by the Kirill Kaprizov, Ryan Hartman, Matt Zuccarello line. And that line to start the season, obviously, is intact. And Kaprizov has shown, obviously, his ability to get better in this league, even though there is a bigger spotlight on him. There was that question, well, how is he going to respond from year 1 to year 2 after being a Calder Trophy winner? He's going to go up against the whole league. And what happened? He became the Wild's first 100-point player and the 5th best scorer in the NHL overall. So he's obviously, generating a track record here where he will find ways to produce. And I think having that chemistry in combination with Zuccarello has proved to be a tough matchup for teams to handle. So if those two are still very much setting the tone, if other players are still capitalizing on their opportunities, and if there is an influx of scoring from the likes of a Marco Rossi, there still, I think, is potential for this offense to be, like I said, maybe tough to corral on a nightly basis. But again, to your point, and maybe we'll talk more about the defense and goaltending. If this is a team that cleans up its own end and doesn't need to score 5 or 6 a night and win by pulling the goalie and getting those 6-on-5 goals and rallying like they did last season for these high scoring wins, then maybe they don't need, that offense to produce as much, and they start winning 3-1 or 3-2. They all count the same. So we'll see if that's maybe a style shift that happens this season for the Wild, maybe in response to some of this personnel change that we're seeing, obviously in light of Fiala leaving in that trade to the Kings.
We'll get to defense and goaltending in a little bit, but I do want to talk a little bit more Marco Rossi because I'm excited. I watched him some in the preseason. It was a very good preseason. He made the team. One of 2 rookies make the team. Addison made the team too. Young players at least, and they've got some more maybe that could contribute along the way. But they're going to have a hard time tempering expectations based on at least the early looks we got in the preseason. And how do you think his role will? How does he fit in role wise with this team right now?
Well, it looks like he's clearly going to start on the line that he pretty much skated on most of training camp in the preseason. And that's, on what would look like the fourth line with Connor Dewar and Brandon Duhaime. But we'll see if it changes. Clearly that's a role that I think he's still going to find his minutes. He's still going to probably get looks on the power play, it looks like. So there's going to be opportunity there. But I think what was most impressive was pretty much kind of the business-like approach that he had coming into camp. You could kind of look at the roster before the preseason and see a spot for Marco Rossi clearly. There was a path for him onto this roster, but the Wild kept saying, obviously, that these spots have to be earned. And he very much carried himself like that and went out and merited it. He led the NHL in preseason scoring. He found a way to be a factor. He helped out on special teams. So I think he pretty much checked all the boxes in, determining his readiness for this opportunity. So we'll see if there's some flexibility in the lineup. I think maybe the intriguing look could be if he ever jumps up and skates with Matt Boldy and Freddie Gaudreau. We'll see. Obviously, he has that potential, I think, to, maybe merit that down the road and warrant that opportunity. But for right now, it looks like he's in that role, like I said, with Dewar and Duhaime, and also probably getting that look on the power play, which obviously the Wild has been wanting to tweak personnel after the struggles last season. And that was something else that I think a takeaway in the preseason was some progress, but we'll see how that holds up in the regular season.
That's a good entry point for me to talk about those special teams, because I had Bill Guerin out at the State Fair. Must have been late August, I guess that was, that I talked to him. And he was, that's one thing that he was really clear about. And one thing that he said, they really have to address and, had to come from within, because they didn't acquire a whole lot of new players. It's got to be new systems or better coaching, or the players just understanding their roles better on both those sides, especially, assuming they do get back to the postseason, such an important part of that. Do you feel like the confidence for them in that area is there yet? Do you feel like they think they've addressed some of those things already?
I think training camp in the preseason was probably a good primer for that. We've seen, obviously, the different looks, and chiefly the addition of a Marco Rossi to one unit and Kalen Addison working the point on the other. So obviously they're trying to mix it up. And really at this point, for the power play, at least, it really does seem like the most impactful change can come from personnel. So we'll again see how that translates to the regular season. But I think there were good signs for the unit in the preseason for them to find a way to contribute 7 goals and capitalize in some key moments of games to, establish maybe some more control of the action. And I think that's key for the power plays. It can't be a drain on momentum, and even sometimes just generating quality looks can be advantageous. So there's a lot of, I think, room for that unit to progress. And obviously, I think part of the reason that Marco Rossi and Kalen Addison stood out so much in their auditions for this team this year was their ability to impact that. And those are skill sets that they have. And on the flip side too, the penalty kill obviously is another focus. And I think maybe that can get amplified a little bit more, because if the Wild can clean up that area and limit goals against, again, I think it goes back to, this is a team, if they're not giving up 4, 5, 6 goals a night, they don't need to score 5, 6, 7. So again, I think the penalty kill is maybe kind of an under the radar area, but it's still a facet of the game that can be really helpful to this team in the big picture. I think for them, a key is aggressiveness. And we saw that already in the preseason. We saw a handful of shorthanded goals. And that is, in the eyes of Coach Dean Evison, a direct link to what is happening in their scheme. Another one is clears. There were times last season where they say it came so close to getting the puck out and they didn't. It came back to end up in the back of the net. So clears, aggressiveness, I think those are kind of 2 of the changes to look for on the penalty kill. And again, goes back to better defending, puts a little bit less demand on the offense.
Absolutely. And let's get to that, because I don't know if they set out, if Bill Guerin set out, at any point, it's certainly at the beginning of last year, to completely change his goaltending situation, because that was, a strength to a certain degree a couple of years ago, at least, and then certainly at points last year with Cam Talbot and Capo Kakkonen sharing the net, doing some good things there. then you kind of hit the slump. You bring Fleury in to kind of solidify that going into the playoffs. That maybe creates a little bit of whatever it was with Talbot. And next thing you know, Talbot is traded. Gustafson's in. The whole thing has changed now. How do you think that, it's a brand new look, and we always know Fleury has a track record, obviously, and it sounds like Gustafson's had a good camp, but when you don't kind of have the guys that you knew of the year before, that there does create that kind of element of how does this all fit together? How is this going to be the solution that gets them forward?
I think training camp was key in the sense that, the Wild finally had consistent reps to work in front of Fleury. And I think that opportunity to just build familiarity was really important, because obviously last season he comes in at the trade deadline. It's late in the season. It's pretty much a rhythm where teams are playing almost every other day. There's not a lot of practice time. And so I think now that he's had a few weeks to, even in practices, not even in games, he only had a few appearances in the preseason, only gave up 1 goal, but the workload wasn't very heavy in those games. So I think even just the practice time to read this defense in front of him, for the defenseman to be able to read and react off of him and kind of gain more of an insight into his habits and where he places pucks. And I think just that opportunity should help. And again, we'll see how it holds up in the regular season. But, him coming in last season, he obviously, had an instant impact in helping this team rack up wins. And I think now that there's a little bit more, like I said, time for them to get familiar with each other, I think that should be helpful for this team. Fleury is obviously experienced. He's a future Hall of Famer, a 3-time Stanley Cup champion. He's at a point in his career, I think it sounds like he's still very much motivated to win. And he saw that opportunity here with the Wild. So again, we'll kind of see how the workload works out. You're right, Gustafsson, I think, impressed in camp with what he's shown, but he is a backup. And so this is still a system where Fleury will probably be the face of this crease. And if it is a situation where the Wild can start to cut back on that goals against average, especially, when they're shorthanded, it could be obviously a very successful formula for this team, especially considering some of the star power up front led by Kaprizov.
Well, and down the stretch last year, there was always the question of who it was going to be, Talbot or Fleury. And I feel like, what do you imagine the split will be? Obviously, Fleury is certainly the starter. Do you feel like it'll be like a 2/3, 1/3 share or even more? How do you imagine they'll divvy up the games?
It's tough to say. I think nowadays in the NHL, the league has kind of evolved away from that clear cut, 70-12 split. Like it's just not as severe as it used to be. But having said that, I think a lot of it too very much is rhythm. A lot of times we see back-to-back split and, there's kind of those logical decisions, but too, like we've seen in the past here when a goalie is gotten on a run, sometimes they merit more of the crease and we see a shift, but I think for Fleury, we should expect him to obviously handle the bulk of that. But there are going to be instances, I think, where this team is going to need Gustafsson to come in and make a difference and not just handle, the second half of a back-to-back or the first half of a back-to-back. And for him, he's at a key kind of moment in his career too, getting this opportunity coming in from this trade from Ottawa. And so I think he's very cognizant too of this opportunity, and having a motivated goaltender obviously could bode very well for the Wild in that situation.
It sure could. Well, a couple more thoughts and we'll let you go. They open the season, of course, Thursday. It's a long year. But that said, I'm sure there's things they want to do well right off the bat to kind of get into the rhythm of the season, make sure they're not falling behind. They were in a pretty good spot most of last year. As you think about the season, though, in the big picture, and you're thinking 113 points, whether that's attainable or not, if they're going to get back to that level or even exceed it, what will the narrative be at the end of the year? What will we be saying about this team if they've had the kind of year they're hoping to have?
I think Kaprizov will probably have done even better, which how can you get even better? Like
sure.
more than 100 and plus points,
like MVP caliber. Like that kind of that
yes.
good?
Yeah. He was kind of, I think, on the fringe of the conversation last season, but obviously Austin Matthews scored 60 goals and Connor McDavid is always there. So, but yeah, maybe if he's much more in that conversation, if he gets to 50 goals, obviously he was at 47 last season. So if he becomes a 50 goal scorer, I think too, another step for Matt Boldy. This is an interesting season for him year two here with the team from the beginning after a small sample size as a rookie, pretty much condensed to the second half of the season, but impressive. But obviously, he was playing alongside Fiala. They had terrific chemistry. Now Fiala's gone. If he is really able to kind of continue his breakout trajectory, I think that would be very key. And two, again, I really do think it goes back to this team's own end. As much as this has been a very offensive-minded team, known kind of that shift, known now for its scoring prowess under Coach Dean Evason. If this team, like I said, can clean up its own end and get, just maybe that tighter goaltending, penalty kill, defending, I think that's part of it too. Last season's team was predicated on those rallies and those last minute comebacks and coming from behind and pulling the goalie sometimes with, multiple minutes left in the third period. And it's an exciting, entertaining brand of hockey, but is it sustainable? I think there's experience probably gained from that. And I think if the Wild gets into a situation again where they have to rally, they're probably no stranger to that. But, for this team to, I think a big focus is details and really taking care of kind of the building blocks of a game and how to be successful. So if they're able to win more 2-1, 3-2 hockey games and kind of maybe just show that other side, another dimension, I think that'll really stand out too come the end of the season. Yeah,
and that could go well for the postseason as well, where you have to be able to win a lot of different ways, and sometimes it is 3-2, and you just gotta grind it out and get it done. Well, I'm looking forward to the season. It should be a fun one to watch. I'm sure we'll talk plenty more as the season goes along, but read all of Sarah's coverage, Star Tribune, startribune.com, and we'll talk soon. Great stuff from Sarah McLellan, as always. Always good to catch up with her, talk a little bit of Wild hockey. There should be a lot more of that to come this season. I think one of the biggest things to watch this season, like Sarah and I talked about, is the goaltending. Completely remade. They're kind of in this spot where they have confidence in Marc-Andre Fleury. Sounds like they've got confidence in Philippe Gustafsson, and they're kind of waiting for Jesper Wallstedt, their high draft pick from a couple years ago, to arrive, but he's still just 19. He hasn't turned 20 until November 14th. So that is, more of a wait and see than it is probably he's going to help right away. So kind of in this spot where they need goaltending this year. They've got a guy who's got obviously the Hall of Fame credentials. Can he do it at a very high level for at least one more season? That might tell you a lot about how far this team can go this year. Speaking of unbridled optimism, let's finish with the cooler. Got a question the other day, a reader-listener question from Leslie M. says, do you think the Timberwolves can win the NBA championship this year? Forget about 50 wins. Forget about, going to getting a top 4 seed. Wants to know if the Timberwolves can win the NBA championship this season. And, right now is as good a time as any to dream big because they are 0-0 in the regular season, and they are 4-0 now in the preseason. They beat the Lakers in the preseason last night, even without Karl-Anthony Towns, without Rudy Gobert playing in that game. This looks to be a very deep team, looks to be a talented team. We don't know yet how Towns and Gobert are really going to fit together. At a certain point, though, that will smooth itself out. They just seem like they have enough players this season that they should be able to be slump-proof. They should win some games even when they're not playing their best. I definitely feel like this is a 50-plus win team. I don't think this is a championship team yet, but I think they are building something awfully good. So I think the optimism is warranted. Like I said, I don't think this is the championship season, but this could be one of those steps along the way where you say they absolutely feel like they are on that trajectory, and if they can take a big step forward this season, then you can start asking that question maybe as soon as next year. But I love the optimism, Leslie. Keep it up. No reason to be pessimistic. Just go into it thinking good things are going to happen, manifest it, and we'll see what happens this year. That will do it for me today. Ben Gessling should join me on Friday to talk more Vikings ahead of that game against the Dolphins on Sunday. Hope you have a great rest of your Thursday. Back at it again tomorrow.